Calm seas can turn hostile without warning, where fins cut water and instinct replaces mercy. Vacations, selfies, fishing trips, and storms blur into moments of raw survival. From secluded snorkeling coves to flooded city streets, each scene reveals a different face of ocean danger. In this video, we'll uncover 6 chilling encounters, fully told, clearly understood, and responsibly concluded. On December 19, 2025, the coastal town of Gansbaai, South Africa, sat beneath a cloudless sky, its waters reflecting an almost turquoise hue that belied the danger lurking beneath. The region had long been known as a hub for marine tourism, drawing visitors eager to glimpse the apex predators that patrolled these nutrient-rich waters. Local fishermen had reported increased seal activity in recent weeks, a sign that hunting grounds were shifting closer to shore. 2 families had arrived separately but found themselves sharing the same stretch of secluded beach that morning. The Mullers, Henrik, his wife Petra, and their teenage son Jonas, had traveled from Stuttgart, Germany, seeking adventure during their summer holiday. The Morettis, Antonio, his wife Gabriella, and their children Luca and Sofia, had made the journey from Milan, Italy, drawn by promises of pristine snorkeling conditions. Both families had rented equipment from a local operator who assured them the area was safe, though he mentioned casually that cage diving operations typically stayed farther offshore. The morning started with promise. Henrik Muller waded into the shallows first, testing the temperature and declaring it tolerable despite the chill. Antonio Moretti followed, helping his younger daughter Sofia adjust her mask. The water remained calm, barely lapping against their legs as they ventured deeper. Petra and Gabriella stayed closer to shore, keeping watch while unpacking towels and snacks. Jonas and Luca, both competitive teenagers, immediately challenged each other to see who could spot more fish species. Within 20 minutes, both families had moved into water roughly 12 feet deep, floating above rocky outcrops where kelp swayed gently in the current. Small fish darted between the fronds, and Luca excitedly pointed out what he believed was a stingray gliding along the sandy bottom. The visibility extended at least 30 feet in every direction, offering perfect conditions for spotting any potential threats well in advance. Nobody noticed the massive shape approaching from deeper waters. The great white measured approximately 18 feet from nose to tail, a female likely drawn by the commotion and the seal colony located just half a mile away. She moved with deliberate efficiency, her dark upper body blending seamlessly with the ocean floor when viewed from above. Her approach went undetected until she was already within striking range. Henrik Muller felt the impact before the pain registered. Something enormous slammed into his lower leg with hydraulic force, and suddenly he was being pulled downward. The shark had clamped onto his right calf, her serrated teeth penetrating through neoprene and flesh with equal ease. Henrik thrashed wildly, his mask flooding as he tried to scream underwater. The pressure was immense, like being caught in industrial machinery. He kicked desperately with his free leg, connecting with what felt like sandpaper-textured skin. The shark released him after approximately 5 seconds, but the damage was catastrophic. Henrik surfaced, gasping, his leg trailing ribbons of blood that spread rapidly through the clear water. Petra heard his shouts from shore and began screaming his name, though she was too far away to help immediately. The predator had not finished investigating. She circled back, her powerful tail propelling her through the water with minimal effort. This time, she targeted the inflatable raft the families had been using to rest between dives. The shark rammed it with her snout, testing its structural integrity. The impact sent Jonas tumbling into the water while Antonio scrambled to grab Sofia before she followed. The raft began losing air from multiple puncture wounds where the shark's rostrum had torn the material. Luca Moretti had been floating nearby when the shark made her third pass. She brushed against him, her dorsal fin grazing his extended arm and leaving deep lacerations that went down to muscle tissue. The boy screamed and began swimming frantically toward shore, his strokes erratic and panicked. His father, Antonio, abandoned the sinking raft and grabbed Luca's injured arm, pulling him along as he kicked furiously to gain speed. Gabriella had entered the water by now, wading out to help despite her terror. She grabbed Sofia and practically threw the girl toward shallower water, shouting at her to run. Henrik was struggling to stay afloat, his injured leg useless, and the blood loss beginning to affect his consciousness. Petra reached him and hooked her arms under his shoulders, dragging him backward through the water with strength she did not know she possessed. The shark made 2 more passes, coming within feet of Jonas as he swam desperately for shore. Each time she approached, someone would slap the water surface or kick directly at her, the sudden movement and noise causing her to veer away slightly. Antonio positioned himself between the predator and his children, his heart hammering so violently he thought it might rupture. He could see her eye as she passed, dark, expressionless, purely calculating. After what felt like an eternity but was likely less than 3 minutes, the Great White descended into deeper water and disappeared. The families staggered onto the beach, leaving trails of blood across the sand. Henrik collapsed immediately, his leg mangled and pumping blood despite Petra's attempts to apply pressure with a towel. Luca sat sobbing, clutching his torn arm while Gabriella wrapped it tightly with her shirt. Emergency services arrived within 20 minutes, alerted by other beachgoers who had witnessed the chaos. Paramedics worked quickly to stabilize both Henrik and Luca, applying tourniquets and starting IV lines before loading them into separate ambulances. The injuries were severe. Henrik required surgery to repair damaged muscles and blood vessels, while Luca needed extensive stitching and would carry permanent scars. Both families survived, though the psychological wounds proved as difficult to heal as the physical ones. Henrik spent weeks in recovery, undergoing multiple procedures to restore function to his leg. Luca developed an intense fear of open water that persisted for years. The incident prompted renewed discussions about beach safety protocols in the region, though authorities emphasized that such attacks remained statistically rare despite their devastating impact when they occurred. The shark was never specifically located or identified, likely returning to her usual hunting grounds after the encounter. Marine biologists later suggested she had been investigating potential prey rather than actively hunting humans, though this distinction offered little comfort to those who had felt her power firsthand. On August 14, 2024, the waters off the coast of British Columbia, Canada, shimmered under late summer sunshine, the kind of day that brought tourists flooding to the whale-watching operations dotting the harbors. The region had gained international recognition for its resident and transient orca populations, with pods frequently spotted feeding on salmon runs and harbor seals. Local operators ran dozens of tours daily, emphasizing respectful distance protocols, though enforcement varied considerably between companies. Maya Thompson, a 28-year-old marketing consultant from Portland, Oregon, had booked a budget tour that promised close encounters with marine wildlife. She had spent the previous evening curating her social media feed, planning the perfect shots to showcase her adventurous lifestyle to her 14,000 followers. The small vessel she boarded that morning carried 12 passengers, plus a captain who seemed more interested in his coffee than in providing safety briefings. The boat departed at 9 in the morning, heading toward channels where transient orcas had been reported hunting. These nomadic killer whales differed significantly from their fish-eating cousins, preferring marine mammals and exhibiting more aggressive hunting behavior. Maya positioned herself at the starboard railing, phone already extended, practicing angles while the boat cut through calm waters. Within 40 minutes, the captain spotted a pod of 5 transient orcas moving parallel to a rocky outcrop approximately 200 yards away. He cut the engine to idle and allowed the boat to drift closer, ignoring the recommended minimum distance of 100 yards. The orcas were engaged in what appeared to be coordinated hunting, their massive dorsal fins slicing through the surface as they corralled prey against the shoreline. Maya leaned far over the railing, extending her phone at arm's length to capture herself in the foreground with the breaching orcas behind her. She cycled through several poses, checking each photo and deleting those where her smile looked forced or the lighting seemed unflattering. Other passengers crowded nearby, equally absorbed in their devices, creating a distraction cluster along one side of the vessel. The juvenile orca approached from beneath, invisible until it was directly under the hull. It measured roughly 16 feet long, adolescent by orca standards, but still weighing several thousand pounds. The animal rose suddenly, its rostrum connecting with the fiberglass bottom with tremendous force. The impact sent a shudder through the entire craft, causing Maya to lose her balance completely. She grabbed desperately for the railing, but her phone flew from her hand, disappearing into the dark water below. Maya's torso pitched forward over the side, her center of gravity pulling her toward the frigid ocean. Only the grip of another passenger snatching her belt kept her from tumbling overboard completely. She hung suspended for terrifying seconds, staring directly down at the massive black and white form circling beneath. The orca struck again, ramming the hull from a different angle. This time, the boat rocked violently to port. sending loose equipment sliding across the deck. Maya was hauled backward and slammed against the railing, the metal edge catching her forearm and tearing through her jacket. Blood immediately soaked through the fabric, where the skin had split open in a 6-inch gash. Passengers began screaming and scrambling toward the other side of the boat, further destabilizing the vessel. The captain fumbled with the engine controls, trying to restart the motor that had died during the chaos. A second adult orca surfaced 20 feet away, its exhalation creating a mist that drifted across the deck. Then a third appeared on the port side, its dorsal fin easily 5 feet tall, dwarfing the boat's occupants. The juvenile made another pass, this time scraping along the hull with enough force to produce a grinding sound that set teeth on edge. Water splashed over the railings, soaking everyone on board. Maya clutched her injured arm, her breathing coming in shallow gasps as panic threatened to overwhelm her completely. Her phone was gone, her arm was bleeding profusely, and the massive predators showed no signs of losing interest. The pod circled for approximately 8 more minutes, their movements becoming a terrifying pattern of approaches and retreats. Each time an orca surfaced nearby, passengers flinched and pressed themselves against whatever solid structure they could find. The captain finally coaxed the engine back to life and began slowly backing away from the area, careful not to make sudden movements that might provoke another strike. Only when the boat had retreated several hundred yards did the orcas finally lose interest, diving deep and disappearing toward open water. Maya collapsed onto a bench, shaking uncontrollably despite the warm air. Another passenger produced a first aid kit and began wrapping her arm. Though the wound clearly needed professional stitches, her jacket was ruined, soaked with salt water and blood, and her hands would not stop trembling. The boat limped back to the harbor where paramedics waited. Maya required 12 stitches to close the laceration and treatment for shock. She spent the following night in observation, her arm bandaged and her pride thoroughly demolished. The incident prompted her to delete her social media accounts entirely, the carefully constructed adventure narrative having been revealed as dangerously hollow. The captain faced sanctions from maritime authorities for violating distance protocols, though he continued operating under a different company name months later. On March 22, 2018, the mangrove-lined channels of northern Australia's coastal waters lay still under a dawn sky streaked with orange and purple. The region served as a nursery for countless fish species, its shallow, brackish waters providing ideal conditions for juvenile marine life. Local authorities had posted warnings about increased predator activity following recent flooding that had pushed unusual species into areas typically considered safe for recreation. Carla Ferrante, a 34-year-old travel blogger from Brisbane, had arrived 3 days earlier to document remote paddleboarding locations for her adventure travel website. She had built a modest following by showcasing off-the-beaten-path destinations, often venturing into areas where few tourists ventured. Her social media posts from the previous evening showed her preparing equipment and promising her followers spectacular sunrise footage. She launched her stand-up paddleboard at approximately 5:45 in the morning, before most of the local fishing community had begun their daily routines. The water was glass smooth, disturbed only by her paddle strokes and the occasional fish breaking the surface. Mist hung low over the channels, reducing visibility to 30 yards in any direction. Carla wore a GoPro mounted on her head, though the footage would later prove too dark and chaotic to be useful. The tiger shark had likely been in the area for several days, drawn by the abundance of prey stirred up by recent weather patterns. At 14 feet long, she was a mature female, her distinctive stripes faded but still visible along her flanks. Tiger sharks were known for their willingness to investigate anything potentially edible, their broad diet and powerful jaws making them particularly dangerous in shallow water. Carla was approximately 400 yards from shore when the attack occurred. She had been gliding smoothly, her paddle cutting through the water rhythmically, when something massive struck the front of her board from below. The impact was instantaneous and overwhelming, the nose of the paddleboard crunching inward as immense jaws closed around the foam and fiberglass. She was thrown forward into the water, her paddle flying from her hands. The shark maintained its grip on the board, shaking it violently, as a dog might worry a toy. Carla surfaced gasping, already trying to swim back toward her only flotation device. The predator released the board and turned its attention to the thrashing human now struggling in open water. The second strike came from below, the shark rising vertically and clamping onto Carla's left leg just above the knee. She was pulled under immediately, the weight and power of the animal simply overwhelming. She kicked frantically with her free leg, her lungs already burning as she fought to return to the surface. The shark released briefly, its teeth having carved deep furrows through muscle tissue. Carla managed one gasping breath before being pulled down again. This time, the shark had repositioned, its jaws closing around her torso. The pressure was incomprehensible, ribs cracking under the force. She stopped struggling, her body going limp as shock set in, and blood loss accelerated toward catastrophic levels. A fishing boat carrying 3 local men had been heading out to check nets when they heard the initial splash and saw the paddleboard flipping through the air. They diverted immediately, the boat's captain pushing the throttle forward. They arrived to find the water darkened with blood and the tiger shark still circling. One of the men threw a gaff hook toward the predator, trying to drive it away. But the animal had already lost interest. They pulled Carla's body from the water within minutes of the attack's conclusion. She showed no vital signs, the injuries sustained in the multiple strikes having been immediately fatal. The paddleboard floated nearby, its front section destroyed, puncture marks from teeth clearly visible in the remaining foam. Authorities recovered the body and launched an investigation into the circumstances. They noted that Carla had paddled during peak feeding hours in water with poor visibility and recent fish activity, all of which significantly increased the risk. The tiger shark was never found, likely having moved on to other hunting grounds. The incident prompted renewed warnings about early morning water activities in the region. Though compliance remained inconsistent, Carla's website was taken down by her family, who requested privacy during their grief. On July 9, 2022, the waters off Cape Cod, Massachusetts, gleamed under mid-morning sunshine. The Atlantic swells rolling in steady patterns that experienced fishermen read like text. The region had experienced a surge in shark sightings over recent summers, with warming waters drawing species previously rare to New England waters. Sport fishing remained popular despite increased predator activity, with many anglers viewing the sharks as an additional thrill rather than a deterrent. Daniel Hayes, a 31-year-old restaurant owner from Boston, had chartered a small vessel for the day with his longtime friend and business partner, Marcus Webb. Both men were experienced recreational fishermen who made annual trips targeting tuna during peak season. They had departed at dawn, motoring 12 miles offshore to productive fishing grounds where birds wheeling overhead indicated baitfish activity below. The morning had started promisingly, with several smaller fish already caught and released. Daniel and Marcus had discussed their strategies over coffee, examining tide charts and comparing notes from previous trips to the same location. The water temperature registered at 68 degrees, warmer than typical for early July, which both men attributed to shifting Gulf Stream patterns. Local marina operators had mentioned increased predator activity, particularly makos and blue sharks, but neither man considered adjusting their plans in response to these warnings. The boat they had chartered was a 24-foot center console, well-maintained but showing its age in places where salt air had corroded metal fittings. Marcus had packed an extensive tackle selection, while Daniel brought provisions including sandwiches, energy drinks, and a cooler filled with ice. They had established a comfortable rhythm, taking turns at the rod while the other managed the boat and equipment. The camaraderie between them reflected years of friendship built through shared adventures. By 10 in the morning, Daniel had hooked something substantial. His rod bent nearly double as lines screamed off the reel, the drag system protesting under strain. He fought the fish in almost 20 minutes, his arms burning with fatigue, before finally bringing a yellowfin tuna alongside the boat. The fish weighed perhaps 80 pounds, thrashing powerfully as Marcus prepared the gaff to haul it aboard. The short-fin mako shark appeared without warning, rocketing upward from the depths at speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour. At 10 feet long, the predator was built for explosive bursts, its streamlined body and powerful tail making it one of the ocean's fastest fish. The shark had been drawn by the vibrations and scent of the struggling tuna, its keen senses detecting distress from hundreds of yards away. The mako struck the boat's hull first, its momentum carrying it partially out of the water. The impact sent Daniel sprawling backward, his shoulder connecting hard with the gunnel. The shark's rough skin scraped along his exposed forearm as it fell back into the water, leaving abraded tracks that immediately began bleeding. The tuna, still hooked, went berserk, pulling the line in wild directions. Daniel barely had time to process what had happened before Marcus shouted a warning as the Mako circled back. The water around the boat had transformed from peaceful blue-green to churning chaos, foam and spray obscuring visibility. This time it lunged directly at the tuna, its jaws opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Daniel tried to pull the fish away, but the shark was far stronger, its bite severing the tuna in half. Blood and flesh exploded into the water, creating a feeding stimulus that heightened the Mako's excitement. The remaining half of the tuna hung limply from Daniel's line, trailing entrails that continued attracting the predator's attention. Marcus fumbled with the knife clipped to his belt, intending to cut the line and eliminate the stimulus, but his hands were shaking too badly to manage the blade effectively. The Mako's dorsal fin carved tight circles around the vessel, each pass bringing the predator closer to where both men now stood frozen at the railing. The shark made 3 more aggressive passes in rapid succession, each time coming dangerously close to where Daniel was braced against the railing. On the 4th pass, it struck the hull again with such force that equipment went flying across the deck. A cooler tumbled overboard, followed by several fishing rods. Daniel's legs were knocked out from under him, and he fell hard, his head narrowly missing a cleat that would have split his skull open. Marcus grabbed anything he could throw, a rope, tackle box, even his own shoes, hurling them at the circling predator in desperate attempts to drive it away. The Mako seemed unfazed, circling tighter, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface like a blade. Each pass brought it closer to the boat's occupants, its investigations becoming more insistent. Daniel hauled himself upright, his forearm throbbing where the shark's skin had removed several layers of his own. Blood dripped onto the deck, mixing with seawater and fish scales. His heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his system in waves that made his hands shake. Marcus had retrieved a boat hook and held it defensively, though both men knew it would be useless if the shark decided to attack in earnest. The Mako made 2 final passes before suddenly diving deep and disappearing. The entire encounter had lasted perhaps 6 minutes, but felt like hours. Daniel collapsed onto a bench, his injured arm cradled against his chest. The abrasions were shallow but extensive, and bruises were already forming across his shoulder and back where he had been thrown around. Marcus started the engine and headed directly back to the harbor, neither man speaking much during the return journey. Daniel required treatment for his injuries at a local clinic, thorough cleaning of the abrasions and antibiotics to prevent infection from the bacteria-laden shark skin. The bruising took weeks to heal fully. Both men eventually returned to fishing, though they abandoned the practice of fighting fish at the boatside for extended periods. Daniel's restaurant now features a mounted photograph of a Mako shark, though he rarely tells the full story of how close that encounter came to turning fatal. The incident reinforced lessons about respecting apex predators and about understanding that humans remain visitors in an environment where they will never truly belong. On February 17, 2020, the coastal city of Recife, Brazil, disappeared beneath churning brown floodwaters as a tropical storm system stalled over the region, dumping record rainfall for 48 consecutive hours. The Capibaribe River, which normally flowed peacefully through the city center, had swollen to 3 times its usual width, overflowing banks and transforming streets into turbulent channels. Local authorities had issued evacuation orders for low-lying neighborhoods, though many residents remained, either unable to leave or unwilling to abandon their properties. The city had a complicated history with flooding, having experienced similar events in previous decades that resulted in significant property damage and occasional loss of life. Urban planning had struggled to keep pace with population growth, leaving many neighborhoods vulnerable to flooding during severe weather. The storm that arrived on February 15th had been forecast as moderate rainfall, but atmospheric conditions shifted unexpectedly, trapping the system over the coastline and transforming predictions into a crisis. Lucas Ribeiro, a 24-year-old street vendor who sold acai bowls from a cart in the tourist district, lived in one of the affected areas. He had spent the previous day moving belongings to higher ground within his small apartment, watching through his window as water levels crept steadily upward. By the second morning, the street outside stood submerged beneath nearly 3 feet of murky water, debris floating past in slow-moving currents. His apartment sat on the ground floor of a 3-story building that housed 12 families. Most of his neighbors had evacuated to emergency shelters set up in schools and community centers on higher ground. Still, Lucas had remained behind with a handful of others who either had nowhere else to go or felt compelled to protect what little they owned. The electricity had failed the previous night, plunging the entire neighborhood into darkness, broken only by occasional flashlights and the gray morning light filtering through rain-streaked windows. Lucas had tried calling his family in the northern part of the city where flooding remained minimal, but cell towers were overloaded, and most calls failed to connect. He had managed one brief conversation with his mother, assuring her he was safe and would leave if conditions worsened further. That conversation now felt prophetic in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Lucas needed supplies desperately. His food had run out, and his elderly neighbor 2 buildings down required medication. Against his better judgment, he waded into the floodwater shortly after noon, carrying a plastic bag and wearing the tallest rubber boots he owned. The water reached his thighs, surprisingly warm, its brown opacity making it impossible to see his own feet. Trash, palm fronds, and unidentifiable objects bumped against his legs as he pushed forward. The pharmacy he sought was only 4 blocks away, a journey that normally took 5 minutes but now presented significant challenges. The current was stronger than he anticipated, pulling insistently at his legs and threatening his balance with each step. He passed a submerged motorcycle, its handlebars barely visible above the surface, and navigated around floating furniture that had been swept from ground-floor apartments. The smell was terrible. Sewage mixed with decaying vegetation and fuel leaked from vehicles trapped beneath the water. Several other people were also wading through the streets, some carrying children on their shoulders, others pushing floating bins filled with belongings. Lucas exchanged brief nods with a few familiar faces, but mostly kept his focus on maintaining his footing. The floodwater contained hidden hazards, broken glass, displaced maintenance hole covers, and electrical wires that might still carry current. Every step required careful attention. What Lucas did not know was that the flooding had pushed several bull sharks from the river system into the city streets. These particular sharks thrived in both salt and fresh water, thanks to their unique physiology, which allowed them to penetrate far inland during flood events. The turbid, debris-filled water provided perfect cover for ambush predators that relied on surprise rather than speed. One large female, measuring approximately 9 feet long and weighing over 400 pounds, had been prowling the flooded streets for nearly a day. She had already fed on several dead animals swept away by the currents, but hunger remained constant. Her electroreceptors detected Lucas's movement from 30 yards away, the electrical signals from his muscle contraction standing out clearly against the background noise. The shark approached slowly, her dark gray body virtually invisible in the murky water. Lucas was focused on navigating around a partially submerged car when she struck. The impact came from behind and below, her jaws closing around his left leg just above the knee with bone-crushing force. Teeth designed to grip and tear penetrated deep into the muscle, severing arteries instantly. Lucas screamed and twisted, trying to understand what had grabbed him. The shark maintained her grip, shaking her head violently to inflict maximum damage. He was pulled off balance, stumbling forward into deeper water. His hands flailed, finding nothing to grip as panic overwhelmed rational thought. Blood poured from the wound, darkening the water around him even further. The predator released briefly, then struck again, this time targeting his other leg. The second bite was equally devastating, her serrated teeth carving through flesh and grinding against bone. Lucas went under, his mouth filling with contaminated floodwater. He surfaced once, managing a single gasping breath before being pulled down again. The shark's power was simply overwhelming, her weight and strength impossible to fight in waist-deep water. Neighbors heard the screaming and rushed to the windows, several capturing fragmented glimpses of the attack through the rain. One man threw a plastic chair toward the thrashing water, while a woman screamed for help, though emergency services were completely overwhelmed by the flooding crisis. Within 2 minutes of the initial strike, Lucas stopped moving, blood loss and trauma having rendered him unconscious. The bull shark dragged his body into a deeper channel where the current ran stronger. She fed briefly before abandoning the corpse and continuing to patrol the flooded urban landscape. Lucas's body was recovered 6 hours later, nearly 2 blocks from where the attack occurred, snagged against a partially collapsed fence. The extensive injuries made identification initially challenging, though his family confirmed his identity through personal effects still in his pockets. The incident shocked Recife's residents, though marine biologists explained that bull sharks regularly exploit flooding events to access new hunting grounds. Authorities issued warnings about entering floodwaters, citing not only shark risks but also contamination, disease, and hidden hazards. The storm system finally moved offshore 3 days later, taking with it the floodwaters and the predators they had delivered into human spaces. Lucas's family held a memorial service once the waters receded, his death serving as a grim reminder of how extreme weather events could create deadly intersections between human activity and natural predators operating far outside their normal ranges. The elderly neighbor he had been trying to help survived the flooding, and later expressed profound guilt over Lucas's fatal errand. However, no one in the community held her responsible for circumstances beyond anyone's control. On November 3, 2019, the crystalline waters surrounding the Florida Keys offered ideal conditions for recreational diving, with visibility exceeding 60 feet and water temperatures hovering in the mid-70s. The region's extensive reef systems attracted divers year-round, offering encounters with tropical fish, sea turtles, and various shark species that typically displayed little interest in human activity. Dive operations ran multiple trips daily, most guided by experienced instructors familiar with local marine behavior. The Florida Keys had long been recognized as one of North America's premier diving destinations, with its barrier reef system extending over 200 miles and supporting thousands of marine species. Conservation efforts had helped restore coral populations damaged by bleaching events and boat traffic, though ongoing challenges from climate change and human activity remained constant concerns. Most dive operators maintained strict protocols to minimize environmental impact while providing educational experiences for visitors. Marcus Flynn, a 32-year-old dive instructor originally from Tampa, had been leading groups through these waters for nearly 8 years. He specialized in introductory courses, helping nervous beginners gain confidence as they explored the underwater landscape. His current group consisted of 6 students, all completing their open water certification dives under his supervision. They had descended to a sandy bottom approximately 30 feet deep, practicing neutral buoyancy skills while colorful fish investigated their presence. The students ranged in age from 19 to 53, representing diverse backgrounds and skill levels. Marcus had spent the previous 2 days working with them in confined water, a swimming pool back at the dive shop, ensuring they mastered basic skills before venturing into the open ocean. 2 of the students had struggled with ear equalization, while another had experienced mild anxiety about breathing underwater. Marcus had patiently worked through each challenge, building confidence through repetition and encouragement. The dive site they had chosen featured a gradual slope from shallow reef to deeper sand channels, providing ideal terrain for practicing buoyancy control. Marcus had briefed the group extensively on surface, reviewing hand signals, emergency procedures, and expected marine life encounters. He had specifically mentioned that nurse sharks were common in the area and posed minimal threat if left undisturbed. The students seemed excited rather than nervous about potential shark sightings, several expressing hope of seeing one. The morning's first dive had proceeded without incident, with the group exploring a nearby reef formation and practicing compass navigation. They had surfaced after 40 minutes, completed their surface interval, and now prepared for their second dive of the day. Marcus felt confident in their abilities, noting improved buoyancy control and more relaxed breathing patterns compared to their initial pool sessions. The nurse shark that approached measured roughly 7 feet from nose to tail, a mature specimen with the characteristic barbels and broad, flat head that gave the species its distinctive appearance. Nurse sharks had a reputation as docile bottom dwellers, often allowing divers to approach closely without aggression. However, this individual was female, possibly gravid, and displayed territorial behavior unusual for the species. Marcus had positioned his students in a semicircle, demonstrating proper finning techniques to avoid stirring up excessive sand. The shark appeared from behind a coral formation, moving with the slow, sinuous swimming motion typical of her kind. Marcus noticed her approach and signaled his students to remain still, intending to let the animal pass without interference. Several students fumbled for their underwater cameras, eager to document the encounter. Marcus gestured firmly for them to keep their hands close to their bodies, knowing that extended limbs might be interpreted as threats or investigated as potential food sources. The shark's small eyes tracked the group as she approached, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Instead, the shark headed directly toward the group, bumping against Marcus's legs with surprising force. Her rough skin scraped across his exposed calf, leaving superficial abrasions. Marcus gently pushed against her snout with his hand, attempting to redirect her trajectory. But the shark seemed unbothered. She bumped him again, more insistently this time, her movements becoming less exploratory and more aggressive. Two of Marcus's students began ascending prematurely, their panic overriding their training. He grabbed the ankle of the nearest one, pulling her back down while trying to maintain awareness of the shark's position. Uncontrolled ascents posed serious risks, including decompression sickness and lung overexpansion injuries. The nurse shark had circled back and now snapped at his fins, her small but numerous teeth catching the rubber and tearing a chunk free. Sand exploded into the water, dramatically reducing visibility. Marcus signaled forcefully for his students to form a tighter group, creating an easier-to-defend formation. The shark made another pass, this time scraping along his calf with enough force to split the skin in 3 parallel lines. Blood seeped from the shallow lacerations, drifting away in pale tendrils. The students were now in full panic, grabbing at Marcus's arms and equipment, their breathing rates accelerating toward dangerous levels. One student's air consumption had spiked dramatically, and her pressure gauge was already showing less than 1,000 psi remaining. Marcus made mental calculations about air supply and ascent requirements while simultaneously monitoring the shark's position and managing 6 increasingly distressed divers. His training had prepared him for emergencies, but working multiple simultaneous problems tested even his extensive experience. The nurse shark struck twice more in rapid succession, bumping and snapping, her behavior completely atypical for the species. Marcus kicked defensively but carefully, knowing that aggressive movements might escalate the situation further. His years of experience kept him focused. Panicking underwater with 6 students depending on him was not an option. After nearly 4 minutes of persistent harassment, the shark finally lost interest. She settled onto the sandy bottom 20 feet away, her body language shifting from aggressive to neutral. Marcus immediately began herding his students toward the ascent line, maintaining strict control over their ascent rate despite their desire to rocket toward the surface. They completed a safety stop at 15 feet, though several students were crying into their regulators. Back on the boat, Marcus's injuries received attention from the onboard first aid kit. The lacerations were shallow enough to clean and bandage, though they would require monitoring for infection. His calf was badly bruised where the shark had repeatedly bumped him, and several students displayed signs of shock, sitting wrapped in towels despite the warm air. Marcus completed incident reports and debriefed his students, explaining that such behavior from nurse sharks was exceptionally rare but possible during breeding seasons or if the animal felt cornered. 3 of his students never returned to complete their certifications, the experience having soured them permanently on diving. Marcus himself returned to the water the following day, professional obligations overriding any hesitation, though he maintained a more cautious approach to nurse shark encounters going forward. The incident served as a reminder that even supposedly harmless species could become aggressive under certain circumstances. Those calm, deliberate responses often meant the difference between minor incidents and serious injuries. Marcus later incorporated the experience into his training presentations, using it as a case study in emergency management and the importance of remaining composed regardless of circumstances. The dive shop implemented additional briefings about shark behavior following the incident, ensuring future students understood that predictability in wildlife encounters could never be guaranteed.